First of all, I apologise for any extraneous noises that you might hear outside, like cars and people shouting. I can't do anything about those, but I do apologise for my own errors when I'm reading this. I'm going to do my best. This is Taking Me With Me, Chapter 1. That'll be 50. My mother broke wind as she bent over to wipe the oven door. This was happening more and more lately, another unsavoury byproduct of the menopause perhaps, but how would I know? I mean, hormones, be they hers or anyone else's, were never up for discussion. Sorry, I said. Well, she wasn't going to acknowledge it, much less apologise. If she wouldn't acknowledge a suicide, then she would hardly do it with a trifling lady fart. True to form, she continued our somewhat leaden conversation as if nothing had happened. By who, did you say? I gathered my dignity on her behalf. By her first husband, I think. You know, Andrew, the nice solicitor that does the legal aid stuff. She straightened up from wiping at the negligible mark on the cooker and expertly fired up the Electrolux with her slippered foot. Although I found this rather rude, my mother was used to holding conversations over household appliances as a matter of course. She'd even been heard whittering over Deep Purple in Rock when Stevie lived at home. She was also used to using words like husband and solicitor as weapons against me. I was sorry I'd started on about Jane's unexpected pregnancy now, when I didn't care a fig for her adult life. In fact, Jane Taylor was the worst person I could have dredged up when I was only trying to ease my mother into a conversation. Any conversation, so I could slip in what I really wanted to say. Jane was this paragon of virtue who had stayed on through sixth form and gone to university when I'd taken the community college quick employment route, and our mothers, still living in the same road, seemed to be keeping up their rabid competition over their daughters, even though it was obvious that Mrs. Taylor had won, hands down, when giving birth in 1965. Her baby had slid out smugly in 2 hours, blonde and neat, while I had kept my mother struggling to disgorge me for days, only to arrive as a scaled-down model of what I am now, too hairy, too unwieldy, and eternally howling in bemusement. My mother, clearly irked again by Jane's superiority that I had oh so stupidly reminded her of, shook her head as she continued to hoover furiously. I hovered around her, hoping we could change tack, but apparently not. I just don't understand you, Louisa. I mean, this is what ordinary people do. They have careers, they marry, and they have children. I'll grant that Jane's order of things is a bit haphazard, but still, you could show some normal enthusiasm. Now wasn't the time to take issue with her suggestion that her only daughter was abnormal. I needed her on my side. The nozzle of the vacuum cleaner sucked greedily around my ankles as I shuffled and sighed. She sighed louder and more meaningfully. She moved to the lounge and I followed her. The vacuum cleaner moved up the blinds as she grimly administered to each individual slat. Oh God, I just have to cut to the chase. I'm moving out. Oh? Somewhere else. Right. She continued to administer to the blinds that clanked maddeningly. Oh, right, is that all you can say? That's about as interested as I was in Jane's pregnancy. Can't you show some normal enthusiasm? I regretted this immediately. This was not the softly approach I had planned. She stopped what she was doing and gave me her patented hard stare, nozzle aloft in mid-vacuum. Sorry, I said. My mother's gaze flicked away again. Well, yes, I've known it was coming. She diverted her attention from the window to the wall. Did the clock need hoovering, perhaps? God, it would have been much easier with us sitting down at the kitchen table with a brew, wouldn't it? No, it wasn't cuppa time in Joan World. Imagine sitting down before tea time and messing up the nice tidy table. Unthinkable. She gave another of her sighs and switched off the hoover. So where is it you're going to, then? Not round here. I see. So aren't you surprised or anything? I mean, that I'm going at all? If she wasn't, then I was. I was surprised at myself for breaking my inertia and overwhelming my own cowardice, and I was surprised at the lack of critical reaction that I had been anticipating from her ever since I'd been to see Ceres over a week ago. Why should I be surprised? You're my daughter. She picked up a duster and started to flick at things ineffectually. I knew you were up to something since you lost. It stuck in her craw every time. that, Justin, and gave up your job. I've been expecting it, and I don't think it's a bad idea, you taking a break for a while." "You don't?" Now I was really surprised. I didn't think she took that much notice of me to have observed all this. Justin's death had barely put a dent in her regime. But then she'd never really taken to him, never really understood what he did or who he was. He wasn't defined enough, not masculine, and certainly not normal enough. Normal was her definition of order and rightness, the polar opposite of weird and, God forbid, way out. I expect in the 60s my ma went round straightening out crumpled spliffs and ironing people's velvet loon pants for when they came back chilly from the love-in. She was fiddling with the top of her polish, desperate to be off and get on. Now that familiar flicker of anger really ignited in my breast. "Give your daughter 5 minutes of attention, can't you? She's going away. Really going." I swallowed again, parched and longing for a Coke. "So, where is it you're off to?" she said. She may as well have been talking to a neighbour about their annual holiday. "I'm going to Cranley Dasset. It's a small town in Somerset." Now it was getting seriously hard to hold in my agitation. "What do you mean? How about, where is this hallowed place, O beloved daughter of mine, that is about to depart from Berry bosom? Or—" She held up her hand imperiously. "I know where it is, Louisa," she snapped. "Honestly, you think I've no experience of life at all, just because I gave up work to look after all this?" "And us," I added, somewhat superfluously. She frowned. "Your dad and I went to Padstow when we were first married, and we drove through Somerset. No motorways then, you see. We had to take the back roads off the beaten track." "Cranley Dasset." She gazed off into the distance. "Yes, now you come to mention it, I remember thinking it was a funny name. Funny little place too. All finger signposts they have down there. Easy to miss them. We may have stopped to have a tea, but I can't remember. It was such a hot summer. There was continual chirping noise, crickets or locusts or some such. I've never heard them back home anyway. I think there was a little petrol station down Cranley Way where a man filled the car up, and Dad asked Dad about the journey down. He had a beautiful Triumph Herald then. You must have heard me mention it. Immaculate it was, cherry red, so stylish and modern. I used to love that everybody admired it. People waved to us as we passed, you know." "So you actually do know something about Cranley?" "People were always coming up and talking about our car. Kept it spotless, he did. He was different in those days. Well, everything was, everything. I had to stop her there, or we were back in the Blitz before we knew it. So you probably know more about it than I do." My mother's misted eyes met mine again briefly. "Not really. It was a car, cream and maroon." "I thought you said it was red. Anyway, I mean Cranley Dasset. Oh, please keep up. This is important to me." I could feel the tears not too far away. It was impossible for me not to lose my patience with her, as it was for her to keep still and focus. She pursed her already ungenerous lips. I was glad I had inherited my father's more fleshy purr. "As I say, there were no motorways in those days. We had to wind our way through all of these out-of-the-way little places, and all of them seemed asleep to me. It was certainly all pretty round Cranley Way, I'll grant you, but then I expect it's changed a lot since, when was it? 1950... She fiddled with the lid on her polish. 58, 59... Ask your father." She studied the spray nozzle, picking at it with her not inconsiderable fingernail. It was in better nick than mine for all her scrubbing and bleaching. "It never seemed much of a place then. Perhaps it's even less of one now, what with all the young people leaving because there's no jobs and no prospects." That last supposedly casual remark may as well have been underlined with a fluorescent marker pen. She put the lid back on her polish and took it off again. She was raring to go, not least to get away from the penetrating gaze of a daughter who always asked far too much of her. Didn't she even want to know why Cranley Dasset, especially as I'd never so much as set one foot in the county of Somerset? Well, just as well, because I wasn't going to tell her. "So I'm going," I began. "But Cranley Dasset, I'm surprised it's there of all places. It's not like you've got pleasant memories of the area like I do, is it? I mean, it won't have a Marks and Spencer's, and the library won't be up to much. And as for the bus service, well, you can just imagine 2 a day if you're lucky." She stalked back into the kitchen, and I followed. How do you know if you haven't been there for years? You just said things change. Perhaps it has for the better. In fact, perhaps it's very well served by all sorts of things. My mother picked up her precisely pressed Houses of Parliament tea towel. The point is, Louisa, how can you even be considering a move there when you've never even been? I couldn't answer this just now. The theory of relativity had more chance of being understood, so instead I tried to challenge what she'd already said. Why do you think it matters if I live near a Marks and Sparks, or even a bus service, really? I mean, most people drive, and the nearest cities are never far, are they? It's not like I need a multiplex on my doorstep. There'll be walks and stuff to make up for it. Walks? For once, my mother was right to sound derisive. It was all I could do to take Hamish up the road. I had not chosen a good line of defence, and even though she was dying to get away to her cleaning, she wouldn't let me get away with it. There are certain things in life that it is impossible to compromise, Louisa. You may not be able to get a key cut when you need one, or buy a decent pair of opaque tights if you get a ladder, especially not on a Sunday. Like I said, that's why God gave us cars, Mother, so we could go and find such indispensables in the nearest city. And as for walking, I'll take it up. It's not like there's been much inspiration to do so in the middle of Luton. My somewhat feeble attempt at pith slid off my Teflon mater. And how, pray, are you going to afford to run a car in a place like that? I'm telling you, there are no proper jobs in rural areas, and no trains either. People in the backwaters can't afford public transport, or even to go shopping at the local shops. You'll find those that are only for tourists, all cream teas, fudge and cider, you mark my words. So I'll eat scones and get pissed, I thought, but I said nothing. She turned her back, doing an inventory of cleaning products under the sink. And where is your nearest city? She asked, not looking at me now. In a minute she'd be gone. Taunton? Bath? Somewhere like that? I thought hard. The map of the area had yet to emboss itself in my psyche. Bristol, maybe? Yes, that's it. So there are lots of big places. Well then, she said. Well what? There we are. My mother was not naturally enigmatic, but her need to get on back to the unchallenging and unvarying routine of cleaning had rendered her zen-like. I sighed heavily as she departed, straight-backed and facing away from me as per usual. Both myself and my admittedly unexpected plan to move to Somerset had already been relegated to my mother's mental wheelie bin, there to be doused in antibacterial spray lest the silliness be catching. This was unreasonable, or at least I thought it was. Maybe it wasn't. Oh God, why couldn't somebody just be on hand, preferably somebody like the psychic Ceres, to tell me what to do, minute by minute? Surely my mother's response to my relocation to pastures undoubtedly greener had been lacking in, well, everything, really. I had expected her to teeter on the brink of, after all we've done for you, at least. Yet, really, was my mother qualified to pass comment on anything in the non-household world? After all, she'd only left Luton twice since I was born, once to visit my Auntie Pat in Hull, and the other for a disastrous family holiday in the Cotswolds. The latter had shown me, even at my tender age, that it was folly to take a cleaning up compulsive to a bed and breakfast and then expect a relaxing break. Her life was informed by adverts and the certainties of the truly ignorant on local radio phone-ins. She was not the best person to ask about anything unless she wanted a regurgitation of a popular opinion or a reaction based on her habitual angst. But I was her only daughter, so couldn't she make an exception just this once and get involved with me? Still, at least I broached the subject now, even though she wasn't going to take it on board yet. I would have to try again tomorrow. And the next day. Just when I was about to take Hamish out for a walk to illustrate my new dedication to a vigorous outdoor regime, Dad came into the kitchen. It's not got an airport, of course, he said, rubbing his hands on his trousers to avoid sullying the parliamentary tea towel. I stared at him, uncomprehending. This Cramley place you're talking about, it's not got the facilities we've got here, and you'd be surprised how quickly you'll miss having them on your doorstep. Miss the airport or the Identikit shopping centre? I hadn't been on a plane for 10 years, and in common with many larger women, I hated shopping. I had no idea he'd been listening, the sneaky bugger. I had never known him to be patriotic about Luton before, but then I'd already had his disappointingly negative opinion of my idea, and so it came as no surprise that he'd want to keep undermining my plans. I had told him about Cranley Dasset when we were wedged in his shed alongside cobwebby seed trays and an old Holborn tins full of bent rusty nails. There were also a selection of garden implements, but these were last used on Grandad's allotment in 1932. Bob Flowerdew, my dad, wasn't. His shed just served as the sanctuary of a man without any discernible hobby. He liked to be among his bits, and bits they were. I'd stupidly told him the uncensored version, and so included my visit to the psychic Ceres. How daft can you get expecting a man born in the war years to understand the wisdom of a clairvoyant who tells his precious and still undeniably grieving daughter to run away to a romance in an unknown part of the country? So you listen to a stranger and not some bloody spirit woman at that, rather than your own parents? He'd shaken his head in sadness or disgust. I couldn't tell. It's not like that. It wasn't her. It was Gran. Ignoring this apparently preposterous reference to his wife's dead mother, he went on, Bombardier Berry on a roll. And you paid to listen to this woman, Louisa. This wasn't just friendly advice. Oh no, fraudulent advice more like, offered to you under false pretences. If you say so. I dropped my eyes. And listening to this charlatan over your own common sense, Louisa? Not to mention over and above your own father. It's the bereavement, girl. It's not what you do ordinarily. Good grief, you shouldn't be doing anything for at least a year. 2 years. 3 maybe. And so it had gone on, but not today. Instead, he was more intent on finding some tokens in the newspaper that he'd wanted to cut out. Sighing heavily again, I picked up Hamish's lead from the drawer and made my escape just as I heard Dad say, for what must surely have been the 1000th time, "Why can't she just leave things where I put them?" And I knew I had to get out, be that down the road with Hamish or off to Cranley Dasset. It was certainly time for Louisa Berry to leave the air-freshened nest before I, like countless unnecessarily laundered items before me, became conditioned for extra softness.